I want to address. So I want to address the comments that we couldn't address last week. We ran out of time. So many of these questions are some things that we've already discussed, but I would like to revisit them just to help me answer this clearly. So Michelle asked. So we're going to in the bucket access class, we get to specify what kind of access authorization mechanism is being used, whether it's IAM or access key or secret key, access key / secret key. And this question of should we have this field in the bucket access, which is the bucket claim, which is user defined, or in the bucket access, which is where I think she meant bucket access here, or should be in the bucket access class. It couldn't be the bucket claim because bucket claim is really for creating the bucket, and access mechanism is separate from bucket creation. Yeah, I think she meant bucket access here. So the question is, should this be specified in the bucket access or should this stay in bucket access class? I remember we said this is really a function of like, as in if you want to be portable, we want to be if we want to be portable across providers that support the same protocol, and if we had it in the bucket access, then portability might be lost when we move from one provider to another, because both providers need not support the same authorization mechanism. Is that right? I mean, that's about it, right?
This is a question raised by Michelle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have Michelle?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said, because I think that was the argument I've been making. But I want to, if someone has a counter argument, I'd like them to come state it, because there is a lot of consternation around this IAM versus secret key design and all the requirements on it. And I don't know, maybe other people have a different feeling about the balance of complexity versus portability. I come down on the portability side, even at the cost of some complexity here. But as long as we're on that side, then yes, what you said is correct. We can't put it on the bucket claim.
I don't think we're really compromising on complexity or ease of use when we go this route.
The complexity is on the workloads, the requirement that they take whatever we give them, right? That's more work that every workload has to do to be compatible with Cozy. If we relaxed that requirement and said, look, if you ask for a secret key, we'll give you a secret key 100% of the time, or vice versa, then you could write your workloads to always expect a secret key or whatever it is you were going to request, and it would make writing the workloads easier. But by doing that, you would have a huge sacrifice in portability, which is where I don't want to compromise. But I don't know, other people may feel differently.
So, I mean, you can add services, or you can have a controller that makes it easier for you. The base API, the lowest layer of the platform, the provisioning platform that is Cozy, need not. I mean, I think it should focus more on functionality than it should provide all the functions needed. And for usability's sake, people can build a CRD, or you can build a upstream service that takes care of it. If it's really that much more, if usability is that much more desired. But that being said, even in PVCs and PVs, like take the example of storage class, a bunch of things can only be specified via the storage class, and like the file system. So I don't know if it's any more complex than other Kubernetes resources, but like you said, if someone has a strong point, I just think the main thing is the platform shouldn't be something that compromises functionality, because complexity can be addressed at a higher layer of abstraction.
Okay, I mean, I don't know what you mean by the higher layer abstraction, but I do agree that it's totally possible to have libraries inside the workloads that are just cozy compatible and can deal with anything we throw at them. And as long as we stand fast and say, you must support both of these in your library, and everyone does that, then there's no problem.
Yeah. All right. So this is clear. Just wanted to revisit why we did this, and we'll respond and we'll see what she has to say. So I'm trying to understand this question a little bit more, but I think she means the workflow focus on a lot on workloads, but we also want to support users. Instead of granting access to service accounts, can we also grant access to a user? Maybe I haven't been clear so far, but I'm not sure if she means grant act as in, like, does she mean only people with a particular Kubernetes user, or only a particular Kubernetes user can provision or utilize buckets versus so you see
it would be good to have Michelle here to explain what she means, but I have to assume that she's getting confused because on the actual like GCS implementation, of course buckets can grant access to both users and service accounts, and so it seems natural to ask, like, is it only service accounts on the Kubernetes side? Why not users on the Kubernetes side? And I think the answer is because it wouldn't do any good to grant access to a user on the Kubernetes side, because you can't run a pod as a user, to my knowledge. You can't do anything with a bucket if you're a user. You have to create a workload. But maybe she knows something we don't.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think it might be possible in Google Cloud to run as a user, but it doesn't matter for our use case. Running as a user, or coming from, as a cloud user, the only reason you'd want to, so if you have any applications in production, they're all going to be running as a service account. User accounts are useful, say you run an organization that has developers use cloud resources, and you want to make sure every developer has limits on what they can provision on the organization's cloud. The workloads that they run as users.
It could be, yeah, that what she's getting at is some sort of a hybrid inside and outside Kubernetes use case, where you want to be able to create the bucket and manage the access from inside Kubernetes, but the actual user is outside of Kubernetes.
So, yeah, that's what I was getting to. This, like, if maybe we should clarify, or we should find out what she meant here. But if she means Kubernetes users provisioning buckets or using buckets, and if it's just cloud provider users, then the answer can be straightforward. It's not needed. But if it's Kubernetes users, then it's kind of confusing, because I mean, we kind of do that with namespaces, and yeah, I don't even know if it could mean Kubernetes users. You're right, Ben. I think the only valid assumption here is she's talking about cloud provider users. Yeah. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. Do you have a connection to Michelle outside of these meetings? Do you talk to her on the side?
Slack sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, I'd suggest just asking her, because I don't want to read her mind.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it's required when pod has access to more than one bucket. I mean, wherever the question is straightforward, so one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because they weren't completely straightforward to me, the questions. So I figured maybe Michelle was going to join this call, so it's worth it to bring this up. So her question is projected volume required here, or do environment variables work? Environment variables only allow you to specify one bucket, so it doesn't really work. Can you also give an example of pod has access to buckets? Yes, we can do that. There's another important question. Let me get to that. Yeah. So is there a reason why we are not following the PVC snapshot model here, where you always have a claim even if it's for brownfield? How do we verify that the specified bucket can satisfy all the fields in the claim? So in snapshot, um, so I don't know what the second part of the question means. So I just had a question about snapshots. So in snapshot, what's the equivalent to PVC PV binding model?
You have volume snapshot that's same as PVC. Volume snapshot, volume snapshot content is similar to PV.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So that's it's a little weird that we don't always have two.
I see. So in our case, so is there a possibility where the snapshot already exists and you want to bind a new? Sorry, the volume.
Right. So then it's same as PVC PV, right? So basically, you just create the volume snapshot content first to point to the existing resource. Then you create a volume snapshot to bind with that volume snapshot content, same as the PVC PV case. So temporarily, of course, you will have just one resource, but then to use it, you will have to have this other resource for user to use it. So now in this model, we are going, kind of going away from that. It's a little weird. I also find that a little weird.
I see. So, so the last solution we made was if a bucket already exists, anyone can bind to that bucket. I think there was some complexity around who gets to delete the bucket. I think that's the reason. Or did okay? So yeah, now I think I remember. So we said if a bucket was created outside of Cozy, then we don't delete it, or the retention policy on the bucket or the deletion policy on the bucket is always or by default retained. I think that's what we said.
But then we can change it, right? Because that field is mutable.
Yeah, admin can change it. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
now,
the reason that we don't want any user to delete it, is that the reason? So we say nobody can.
Yeah, it was created outside of Cozy, so we don't want to take up we don't want to accidentally delete it. I think that's the reason. If we had the deletion policy to be delete, like we do with Cozy created buckets, then when the bucket goes away, it'll get deleted. We don't want that.
So PVC, PVC PV, one snapshot content have the similar problem, but probably your argument is like bucket maybe will be shared by more people.
Right.
That
by definition, this is a multi-user system, or like it's always over the network and always multi-user. In at the same time. So the question here is, so if we have a bucket claim always, even for an existing bucket, I think that I mean, as long as we so I'm trying to remember why we didn't need a bucket claim. So I've heard arguments both ways. So I'm just trying to form the thoughts that we had so far. One is we don't really need a bucket claim to use a bucket. We just use a bucket access and point to the bucket directly, and that's because even if you even in the normal use case, let's say you created a bucket using Cozy, and it's not a brownfield bucket, and you want to use this bucket from a second namespace, you directly have the bucket access point to the bucket anyways, right? So it's not very different from what we do already. I think that's the reason we said bucket access can directly point to the bucket without having a bucket claim in each namespace. Am I making sense? Let me draw this. I think that'll make it better. Yeah.
I think one of the concerns there was what if the namespace goes away and that bucket gets deleted?
Bucket access points to bucket one. Let's call this bucket one. And then, namespace 2, we have bucket access point to bucket 1. So, and let's say namespace 1 or namespace 0 is where the bucket is created. Bucket name points to bucket 1, and bucket access 1 points to bucket 1. Yeah, so let's say in namespace 0 is where it was created, in namespace 1 and namespace 2, we just directly access it. And like you were saying, Ben, yeah, if the namespace goes away, we don't want the bucket to go away.
Or you do want the bucket to go, you want the bucket object to go away, but you don't want the actual bucket to go away, right?
Right.
Otherwise, you have a bucket hanging around forever. It'll never get deleted.
So you're saying if I had a bucket claim,
you got a bucket claim and it was bound to the bucket, and then you deleted the namespace, obviously the bucket claim will go away, and then the bucket that's bound to it should go away for garbage cleanup. So the downside to pointing to something owned by another namespace is just that it can go away.
Yeah, and we'll have to maintain references, backward references from bucket to all the bucket claims.
What? No, there's only one bucket claim per bucket.
Right. If I'm saying if we had a bucket claim in every namespace, that would be complex.
It would be more objects, but it would be simpler.
All right.
Remember the way back at the beginning, my initial proposal for bucket sharing was we just clone the bucket and create more bucket claims to bind to them, and so you end up with lots of copies of everything. Now, lots of copies of everything isn't great, but it's really simple, right? Because you can just follow extremely straightforward rules about how things work. Everything's one-to-one, everything's simple, nothing goes across namespaces, and it's just, there's no ambiguity.
Right. So
but you have a lot of objects. That's the price you pay with that strategy.
Yeah. No, I meant, what I meant was bucket claim in every namespace pointing to the same bucket, not to a copy of the same bucket.
But then you have the many-to-one problem.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was saying. References to all the bucket claims, the backward references. Yes, we wanted to avoid that. We got away from it. So her question is, why do we directly have bucket access point to bucket 1 at all? And the answer is, this is the simplest model without dealing with deletion or backward references. And we don't need back references from bucket to bucket accesses at all. Because the lifecycle of a bucket and bucket access are completely separate. If a bucket gets deleted, it's you don't have to delete the bucket access. That can be done separately. So are you following what I'm saying? I can help and explain it better or easier. Okay, I'm going to begin with Sano. Okay. So her question, Michelle's question was, is there a reason why we don't have a bucket claim for every bucket that is utilized, or for brownfield buckets, why do we not have bucket claims? And the answer was, it's not very different from buckets that are used from namespaces where the bucket, in other namespaces than the one the bucket was created in. Brownfield is the same as accessing bucket from a different namespace. That's what he said.
Yeah, but does the bucket have to be created ahead of time? My interpretation of what Michelle is saying is she's looking at the way we do brownfield snapshots, where you create a volume snapshot content object first, then you point the volume snapshot object at the VSC, and they bind.
I see what you're saying.
And it's still one-to-one, but it's just that you can, there's a mechanism in the VS object where you can give it a VSC name directly, and you have to do one or the other, right? You either have to say I'm taking a snapshot of an existing PVC, or I'm creating a snapshot that already exists, and then two very different things happen depending on that choice. Now, we don't have a concept of like creating a bucket that's not empty, Or you either ask for an empty bucket or an existing. I guess those are the two cases. I want to create a new empty bucket, or there's already a bucket and I want to bind to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could follow the source model for volume snapshots. Same way. I forget what, do you want to bring up the API definition for bucket claims and how you specify?
Let me do this. All right. For bucket claim, yeah. It just has a bucket class name because we're using it only for creating the bucket now.
Right, but if you want to be able to bind to a brownfield one, then you need an optional bucket name field.
Well, no, the whole story right now is you don't need a bucket claim for brownfield.
Okay, well, yeah. So I think that's what Michelle was asking, is why don't we follow the snapshot model where you do?
Right,
So
right.
if the answer is we don't, then that's the answer.
So remember, we did consider having it here. I'm just trying to, I'm asking if you can help remind me why we chose to go with this model. I remember we discussed some time back where if we could have the bucket, if we could have a bucket claim regardless of whether it was greenfield or brownfield.
I believe initially we actually always have both. And then at some point this get removed for some reason, but I don't remember why. Is that just for simplicity?
We end up going back and forth on does a bucket access need a bucket claim or doesn't it, right? Because if it needs a bucket claim, then obviously you need to be able to create bucket claims for existing bucket, for brownfield situations. But if it doesn't need a bucket claim, then you don't. I mean, if the bucket access can point directly to a bucket, then in the brownfield situation, you just do that.
Yeah. It's just an extra step of indirection. I don't think it adds any value.
I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I could possibly believe it.
Because I can't think of. I mean, if you say the value is the fact that it is symmetric or it's exactly like some other model, maybe that's valuable. But technically speaking, I don't see what benefit do we get from having a bucket claim every time we want to access a bucket, even if it's a bucket created outside of this namespace or outside of Cozy. We don't need it, so we go with the simplest answer. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this.
Where it's going to end up mattering is when you start to think about how consumers of the API will automate bringing up their apps with existing buckets, because you have to think through the situation where I want to be able to create an app with a brand new bucket versus I want to be able to create an app with an existing bucket, and how that existing bucket will get sort of injected into the automation that sets up the app. Because if the automation is responsible for creating bucket accesses, then you're going to have two different branches for the bucket access creation to go down, right? One is for create a bucket claim and bind to that. The other one is give me the bucket name that someone else already created. One could argue that there's it's easier for the automation to always do the same thing, and for someone else to just basically make sure a bucket claim is in the namespace before you deploy the app, so that the app can always deal in terms of bucket claims and never need to do anything weird.
Okay, so that makes me question: Do we need to ever point the bucket access to a bucket claim anymore? Why not just have it point?
We can do it any way we want. It's a question of like what's going to feel right for consumers of the API, right? Because in a Kubernetes world, it's very common to just like check all your Kubernetes objects into some Git repo, and then have some, and templatize certain things, and then when you're ready to instantiate your app, you just, do git clone kubectl apply, or use
Yeah, I
customize
see
or
what
something.
you're saying. Yeah, you're saying that we don't want to have steps to do it. You just want to be able to create all at once.
Right. Yeah, we want to make sure that our API objects lend
declarative.
themselves to being very declarative and just say, this is what my app should look like, and we just build it. And if there's any sort of if then else is in there, you're screwed.
But in cases like buckets that are existing or that were created outside of Cozy, you don't have an option. I mean, if you know the bucket name up front, you can directly use it. But other than that, you can't.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that I'm an expert or I know what the right answer is here. I'm just saying, like, going through those kinds of exercises will tell you what the right answer is.
We've gone through them, and
no, I mean actually using the API as an application user would use it, and trying to do things like, deploy a new application, clone an application, backup and restore an application, all the kinds of things that the people are trying to use the Kubernetes API for, with, today with volumes and snapshots and stuff. And when you layer in buckets, you just got to figure out what does it look like to back up an application that has a bucket, and then to restore that application to a new cluster and to use the same bucket. What exactly do you have to do, and is it awkward or is it natural?
Yeah.
And I don't want to like get us hung up on those kinds of things, but I'm saying, like, once we have this implemented and shipping, and people start doing those things, they may come back to us and say, this is terrible because I can't do the thing I want to do with your API. And then we'll know that we did the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's okay to say we'll see how it goes, and or we'll see how people use it and then improve from there. As long as we're all aligned with the idea that we're ready to, tear it all up and start from scratch if needed. It shouldn't get to that point, but I'm saying that we might have to change stuff later on.
Yeah.
We do need a bucket claim name in the bucket access. That's pretty clear if you want to keep it declarative. With bucket name, it has to be a pre-existing bucket. I mean, there is no other way around it. It's like PVC binding to an existing PV.
Right, but what I'm getting at is, so think of the way snapshots work today. Mm-hmm. If I always want my application to start from a snapshot, if, like, in the case that I'm restoring from a backup, for example, you would just have a requirement that the snapshot exists ahead of time, and then your application manifest to create the application would have a PVC that points to a snapshot with a known name, and then your prerequisite would be that snapshot has to get there somehow, whether it was a pre-existing snapshot of a volume when you previously snapshotted your application, or whether it was a snapshot that some administrator created and then you bound a VS to it. The idea would be the prerequisite is a snapshot exists in the namespace with a known name that is chosen by the application deployer, and then everything else is automatic. In this world, like, you can't specify the name of the bucket because that's going to be, it's a non-namespaced object, so you have to be taken as an input, not as an output, and then you would have to use that input in your bucket access. And so then at that point, the prerequisite is something has to exist, and you have to pass in the name. You can't know the name ahead of time. It's a very subtle and probably unimportant distinction.
Right.
But
okay. No,
but it's,
yeah. If the user if the user wants to bind to something that's already existing, I think it's reasonable to say, do the first step of making it exist.
Right. It's just that with snapshots, you can control your starting snapshot name because it's a namespace object, and then you can just put a requirement on someone to set that up ahead of time. And with this model, you can't do that because the name is got to be chosen by someone else and input into the process.
Well, you could control the bucket name for a bucket created outside of Cozy. The only place you can't predict
because it's a non-namespaced object, right? So whatever name you pick could potentially conflict with something that's already in the system. You can never prevent that.
Yeah, as a user.
But if it's a namespaced object like the bucket claim, you get to choose the name, and then you can just say ahead of time that it has to be bound to the bucket somehow.
Yeah, that somehow part is the confusing part, right? Because
So I think that's the only that's the only real difference in how snapshots are done, is that because you always bind a VS to a VSC before you can use it, the user always is in a position to name the volume snapshot whatever they want because it's in their namespace.
The volume snapshot content is namespaced. Is that right?
No, the VSC is not namespaced. The VS.
But that's the same, right? But why I'm not getting why you're saying that it's so different?
Yeah. Because can you control the VSC name?
Content also you can. Admin can actually just create.
The admin can control it, but the user cannot.
But that's the same, right?
It's the same thing, right?
Not if you have two copies of the same application running in the same cluster. Like, they will conflict. But if they're running in two different namespaces, they can name their volume snapshots the same thing in their different namespaces, and their VSC's names don't matter. Right?
Oh, but if you're talking about the bucket claim, then that's the same, right? I mean, I'm not getting what you're trying to.
Right. So if for a pre-existing VSC, if you're trying to bind VS to a pre-existing VSC, someone should it's not possible to predict the VSC name, right? So you can't really just have a declarative specification of the VS name now, because it has to point to an existing VSC. Isn't that right? So let's say I create a volume snapshot which leads to the creation of volume snapshot content in namespace 1. But in namespace 2, let's say I want access to volume snapshot content created in namespace 1.
Then you have to clone the VSC, give it a new name, create a new VS, and bind it to the cloned VSC. That's how you would do it today with snapshots. And the second VSC would obviously have a different name because it has to.
I see, but the VSC2 has to exist before it can be used, right? Like before it can be bound to the VS in the namespace 2. And you don't really have control as a user. You don't really have control over the name of VSC2.
Right, but
so you
don't care what it is. You just say you have to create the VS that is bound to it ahead of time, and an admin can do that.
Okay. So as you were just saying, so really what you're doing is no different from that. Having a bucket claim here wouldn't really give us any benefit because you still have to know the name of the bucket up front.
But you could require that the bucket claim exists ahead of time, and so that you can refer to it by name, and then you can just have a requirement that if your application is expecting a non-empty bucket, somebody has to create that bucket claim and bind it to the bucket ahead of time. But you can't do that today with this design, right? Because now a new bucket claim will always result in a new empty bucket. I can't force a bucket claim to get bound to a pre-existing bucket.
But instead of expecting an admin to create a bucket claim for you, a pre-existing one, bound to a pre-existing bucket, why can't the admin create a bucket access for you, pointing to a pre-existing bucket? How is that different?
That they can, and maybe that's the answer, is you just say, hey, the bucket access is the thing that must be created ahead of time.
Yeah.
And then you're done.
Yeah, that's the question. Okay, I think that answers it. And I also got to know how VSC and VS works. It's good. How do you verify that the specified bucket can satisfy all the fields in the claim? The fields in the claim are just the bucket class. And what do we have in the bucket class? Oh yeah, didn't we say bucket class doesn't apply to a pre-existing bucket? Yeah, so I think her question is, how do we verify that the specified bucket can satisfy all the fields in the claim? The claim doesn't have any fields. If it's a I mean, it doesn't have any fields other than just the bucket class name. So there's nothing to verify. Yeah. Mhm. All right. So this is the famous reference policy question. She has strong objections about allowing anyone to use buckets created outside that namespace. And I think we should start aligning with PVC snapshot, which has already solved this problem. How has it solved the problem? So our answer was first reference policy, then we found out gateway API is not using reference policy. So we said we'll go with the simple answer of having the three models. What was this?
So
we said bucket.
So the way snapshots handle it again are by being really dumb and saying, you know, the only way that you can get access to a snapshot in another namespace is for some admin to clone the VSC and create a VS in your namespace that binds to it. So the act of granting the access across namespaces is done by someone with elevated privileges, and then you just use the VS in your namespace. And that's all you can ever do is use VSs in your namespace. And of course, we spend lots of time on this.
Yeah, but I think Michelle's point was that, you know, since we have already done this for other API objects, why don't we just say, hey, we use the same model? I think that's, at least that works for now. If we want
that was my opening proposal more than a year ago. We said we didn't like it.
Oh yeah.
This is not something we want to get the reference policy, not something we want to get resolved in this CAP, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah, so we don't want to. So we also, you know, looked into reference policy, and just because of the complexity, it looks like gateway API didn't go with it either.
Did you check with them? Did they really give it up? What, I don't know what is.
They stopped using it. That much is for sure, but I haven't asked them why.
Okay. What does Michelle mean there?
I think she means she wants some mechanism to say, these are the people that can access my buckets. Okay. Everyone can't access my buckets.
That's if, you know, that is something that can work right now, right? I think it's okay to say that that's the current approach. Maybe, you know, in the future we can look at if there's a better approach. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Okay, I'm fine with that. It sounded from what she wrote, it sounded like she wants an answer. She has a strong objection to allow anyone to specify any bucket without a way for an admin to restrict access. Okay, yeah, maybe you can just add something, just say, hey, right now we just follow this up, just describe the approach. Yeah, so approach. Yeah, so this is 2 weeks back we discussed an approach, and this seemed very reasonable, where we'll just have these 3 modes defined in the bucket itself through the bucket class, let's say, where the sharing is only within the same namespace, or all namespaces, or selector based. Okay, but I forgot what did she say? Was this? Oh no, so I haven't.
But is that specified on the bucket claim or the bucket class?
It has to be in the bucket class.
That's kind of weak, right? Because then users can't.
Anyone can use any bucket class.
Huh?
Anyone can use any bucket class. Is that what you mean?
No. What I mean is, like, if there is no bucket class that offers the kind of sharing you want, then you can't do what you want.
Yeah, the admin is now restricting all the different kinds of access you can have. That's a feature. So why can't we just
park
But
this
we
and then-
wanted to have self-service bucket sharing, and now we're saying that no, the admin actually has to be involved again by at least creating a bucket class up front.
well, at least I think for this version, right? I mean,
Yeah, for this
we have been
version,
talking about this forever. I don't think.
right. I think the answer here is simply to
Yeah.
say we don't want to do this in this
Yeah,
release.
let's just go with whatever snapshot or just
It
leave
has
that
to be-
approach for now.
Right, because it has to be the admin who sets up the bucket classes, because the admin's the only one who knows of all the namespaces.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Ben is saying that if God, I lost my train of thought. But if you're going to have some way to restrict who gets to access what bucket, and if we want to do it in a self-service manner, having the admin to set up a bunch of bucket accesses or bucket classes up front is not self-service anymore. Isn't that what you're trying to say, Ben?
I mean, I'm also open to the idea that we say, no, we don't want self-service, and that the admin should have to be involved with.
I mean, it's
Bucket
not
sharing.
really.
So we don't have to
self-service.
make that decision right now, right? So right now
Right.
it's just whatever that is available, which is the admin has to be involved for now. But then in the future we can look at if there is a better approach for self-service.
Mhm.
This is found we
I
can't.
don't think we're using self-service, but I think we should be focused right now. I don't think we should go down this rabbit hole. Yeah.
Reference policy.
Well,
Okay. Yeah.
We
so
definitely want self-service consumption of shared
Yeah, we
buckets. Where I think the question is do we want self-service exposing of or vending of shared buckets?
Yeah. So it's still self-service because it's like runtime versus compile time. I mean, we're not compiling or running anything here, but when setting up the cluster, the admin could create a bunch of bucket classes, and the user gets to choose one from the many. The admin doesn't have to be involved during the bucket creation step itself. The admin's involvement is upfront. It's like while compiling, not while running. So it's not, we're not really losing self-service, but you have self-service within the constraints defined by the admin, which is kind of what we want. Don't you think?
I mean, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I don't think we're really losing self-service here. But anyways, again, I think it's important we focus here. We don't have to answer this now because we said version alpha of the cap, we're not going to do that. All right, so there's this question about retention period for compliance use cases. Will that conflict? I think I explained what this use case was for those who might not know. Where at Minio we have some customers who want to make sure that objects that have been created cannot be deleted even if you wanted to for a minimum retention period. This is to deal with ransomware, where people within the company try to hold data ransom. I don't know, to get a raise, or I don't know what it is. It's funny, but I don't think it's that frivolous. But being more serious, I think that's what she's trying to say. Shouldn't there be a retention period for compliance use cases? I think bucket specific policies like that can be, it's something that has to be specified during the creation of the bucket. Actually, no, someone might want to change this afterwards also. Yeah, we don't have a mechanism to set policy on the bucket after it's been created.
Well, and
But
some things like object lock have to be enabled at bucket creation.
That can also be done after it's created, right?
No. Not on all S3 input targets.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
But we have talked about the concept of bucket mutation before, which is what a policy change would be, and we've said no, we're not going to touch that. Right? If you want to mutate it, you do it out of band.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I think the answer here is I don't know. Are we putting ourselves in a place where we can't support this use case by saying that? So if I said, okay, I'm not going to answer this for alpha, but I'll answer it somewhere down the road. But with the current approach, where we're assuming bucket mutation isn't going to happen, are we putting ourselves in a position where we might have to redesign things again?
I mean, things like retention periods seems like a proprietary, opaque kind of a feature, anyways.
It's a S3 thing.
Huh?
It's a S. Okay, let's see. S3 API.
Look up object lock.
Yeah, let's look at object locking is more universal. Like Google Cloud also supports it. Azure also does. Okay, retention period and legal hold. Yeah, legal hold is what I mentioned, I think. Okay.
The thing is, it has to be enabled when as part of the bucket create.
So it's not, yeah, I think that Ben is correct. As in, it is not an S3 API. It's not an access level API. It's a creation thing, which is proprietary.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the kind of thing that, you would put in your bucket class, you'd implement in your driver, and you'd make it all happy so that the customers can use it, but no one would expect that to be portable across implementations. It's just a feature of a specific driver.
Yeah.
And it's also, and it would only apply at creation time if it's on the bucket class. And so if you ever wanted to change it, assuming you could, it would be something you would just do out of band. It's doesn't feel like a big deal.
So is S3. I just want to see if it's a part of the S3 spec or not. Let me quickly do that. AWS SDK Go V2. I see. So is S3. I don't think it's going to take long. This is DK Go V2. Service S3. And they have a create bucket input. I just want to see if it's a part of the API spec. Okay, the definition is here. Okay. Bucket name, bucket ID, enable object versioning, and tags. So it's not a part of the spec, it looks like. Services 3 API create bucket. Let's see this other one. Oh, okay, so what I was looking at earlier was something called light sail. It's different from regular S3. And here we have create bucket configuration, grant full control, object lock enable. There it is. Okay, so I think this is the spec for it. Create bucket. So this is the API spec for create bucket, and in params, you have name, you have ACL, object log enable. It's a part of the spec. Wait, hold on. This is not supported by Amazon S3 on Outpost buckets.
Right, because Outpost isn't a full S3 compatible.
Mm-hmm. I know that it's also a part of the GCP, GCS, sorry, Google Cloud Storage create bucket API. Google Cloud Storage create bucket. So, so the question is really, should this be a part of the creation, or should this be a part of something out of band? And the easy answer is, it'd be easier for us if it's out of band, but we need to do the right thing here.
You can't enable object lock after a bucket's been created, though.
Okay. Location, configuration. I'm guessing it's actually request. So yeah, I'll take a look at this, but I think request body. So this is for so you can't create a bucket at the name. Also okay. So this is insert. Okay, so bucket create is here, And lock retention policy. Yeah, so in Google Cloud, it's something that's done afterwards. It's just such something that you can't unlock, but you can do it afterwards for a bucket. One of the parameters is the bucket name. So in AWS, it seems like it's upfront, but with Google Cloud, it seems to be something that you can enable but never disable. So how do you want to do this?
Seems like a proprietary bucket class feature.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fair to say it has to be done upfront, and if you're doing so, I think it's fair to say that Cozy only supports bucket locking enablement upfront when creating the bucket. And if we go with that, I don't think that's on. I don't think we're really restricting users too much when we say that. I think that's fair, and in that model, yeah, this could be that proprietary extension that gets specified in the bucket class. Because I'm also considering if this is going to make us get into the whole bucket mutation business, but no, not so far. Yeah, so the second part of this question, how will that conflict with deletion policy?
That we shouldn't have to worry about that. That's handled at the storage side.
So does object locking also work if you're deleting the entire bucket?
The delete would fail.
Okay, good to know. All right, so I have an answer here. We're almost out of time. Okay, so just this last one. So I was just looking into the new liens feature for design in this area. The current approach that we do with finalizers for PVCs and snapshots, I think, is too complex. All right, so what is the new liens feature? Is there a
That one is not even alpha yet. I mean, it's still in design, but you can,
Okay.
I can show you a work in progress cap.
Okay, that would be useful. I would like to take a look.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, one last thing then is, do we need force delete? I was fine without force delete. But the idea for force delete is even if someone is using it, I wanna delete the bucket. Right now, you can't delete a bucket if it's being used. I think if someone wants force delete, they could forcibly remove the bucket accesses, so they remove the users and then delete the bucket. I think that's okay. As an admin, they have the privileges to do it. I don't see why it needs to be yanked out from under someone who's using it, rather than by first taking the user away and then deleting it. I think we can get rid of
added a link to that cap. You can take a look.
in the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you can reference that one, saying maybe if that's available, then we can use it. But right now, it's not even alpha. I don't know if it can target alpha even in not 24. Not promising. Does not look like it's promising right now. So
okay,
that's I mean the proposal itself looks very interesting. It's just right now it seems to did not get enough support to move forward yet.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they have. One last thing is protocol being a list. We've always said no because you could create multiple bucket classes, one for each protocol. Are there any objections to that?
Sounds fine.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I think I have most of the answers. I'm going to update the cap, ping Michelle. clarify what you meant by some of the comments, and go from there. Thanks everyone. We're almost out of time. Unless you have some questions, we can finish the meeting now. All right. Thank you everyone. Talk to you all
Thank
next
you.
week.
Oh, and you know the cap merge deadline for 1.24. I know we don't have to follow that, but it's good to use that to
push it.
push this
Yeah.
one.
I don't know, Shing. I can find out.
It's I can tell you it's February 4th is the cap merge deadline, and PRR, there's a deadline for PRR, which is 27th of January.
Okay. So yeah, let's this time try to make it. Yeah, so
Right.
we haven't really been. Yeah, let's okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Shing.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone. Bye.